So let me introduce Emma while she's getting queued up. She is going to present her active inclusivity, a skills-based model. I owe extra thanks to Emma. We had a speaker drop out at the last minute, and Emma agreed to fill in literally like 2 weeks ago, so thank you. Dr. Emma Sterrett-Hong is an associate professor and the associate dean of equity and inclusion in the Kent School of Social Work and Family Science. Yay, Kent School. I've been teaching for them for about 15 years. Her research focuses on the impact of societal structural factors and interpersonal relationships, on the health and well-being of underserved youth, as well as the dissemination of evidence-based psychological practices. Her work has been funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, Substance Abuse, and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA, and the National Institutes of Health. In addition, she is a licensed psychologist and licensed marriage and family therapist and maintains a small family therapy practice. So welcome, Emma.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to first thank everyone for inviting me to be here and for being such great hosts, and thank you all for being here. I am not a morning person. You'll never catch me any place at 8 in the morning, but when I came in this room, I will say that I just felt like more energized. I felt like the vibe was so positive, and it really just gave me a lot of energy. And so, thank you all. So I'm going to be presenting something that is really new, that really before 2 or 3 weeks ago lived in my head, and then Ryan Quinn in the College of Business kind of helped me turn it into a tool. And so it's called the Active Inclusivity Development Model. And it really, I realized like a week ago that it spells out aid, which I really like, because it is about how to help organizations that are feeling stuck. And so the reason I started thinking about putting together sort of, for me, what's a conceptual model or a guide is because I was working with some organizations either through volunteer work in my role as Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion, or consulting with others, and noticing that there was a lot of real motivation, interest, passion related to DEI work, and yet these organizations were really getting stuck. And I was surprised for my own organization, others, and I think other people who are part of those systems also were surprised that how is it that we know that this is something we care about, but we are having a lot of internal resistance, we are having obstacles, and so that's what made me start thinking about, okay, what are some of these obstacles, and then how to start the process of getting unstuck. So what I started to notice is that it seemed like I could sort of organize some of the obstacles or barriers to sustaining DEI work into 6 areas. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And more so, I'm going to share with you some stories because it's not, what I will say is that this model is not super prescriptive. It's really meant to inspire you to think about, okay, where is it that we might be getting stuck, and how might we generate solutions, or at least some strategies to try. So I'm going to go through each of them one at a time. So first of all, I wanted to start with, so the Active Inclusivity Development Model organizes these obstacles into 6 areas, and they spell out the word choice. Again, I'm a therapist, not in business. That was all Ryan. So choice. So C is critical consciousness. So before I tell a story that sort of illustrates how critical consciousness can be a barrier, but then also generating more critical consciousness can be a way to sustain some of our DEI work, I first wanted to ask if you all have heard of this person, Nimrod Murphy. Has anybody ever heard of this person? Okay, have you all heard of the phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Yes. Okay, so something I really just learned is that actually, when this phrase first was developed, so today I think we typically think of it as what? If someone had to describe what is that phrase meant to say, meant to communicate, what does that mean?
Put you down, pick yourself up.
And did I hear something? Yes. Yes. So it is. It's like pick yourself up, be independent. But ironically, originally, it was actually kind of a sarcastic insult. So this person, Nimrod Murphy, in 1834, had written, is actually in Nashville, about that he had created some sort of perpetual mobility device to keep himself in perpetual motion. So back then, there were a lot of people coming up with different inventions and trying to sell them. And so a columnist commented on this idea and said, yeah, I bet he thinks he can pull himself across, I think it was like the Cumberland River, using his bootstraps. And so this phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, was originally a sarcastic remark about, actually, you can't do that, right? And so you see this newspaper or this article at the bottom from Inside Higher Ed that says the bootstrap fallacy, self-levitation doesn't work. So one thing I wanted to say, and when I think about critical consciousness, so we talk about critical consciousness a lot. What is that? And so for me, it really means thinking about how whatever is going on is actually much larger than the individual. So it's not just, even if it was possible, which is not, but even if it was possible to pull yourself up all by yourself, by your bootstraps, that still doesn't mean that there isn't a larger pattern that could be contributing to whatever the difficulty is. So in telling some of these stories, and I'm going to tell you the first one now, I wanted to mention that probably partly because I am a therapist, I've been really sensitive about how to share things so that they're concrete and kind of illustrate some of these points without giving too much detail to make someone feel sort of exposed. And so what I'm going to do is start with a quote, and I did not put it up here because, again, I don't want anyone, not that anyone in this room even probably would know any of these situations, but just because I am overly cautious, I'm just going to read you the quote and then tell you the story. So the first quote is, some of our faculty of color have some of our highest student evaluation scores. Some of our faculty of color have some of our highest student evaluation scores. So my story related to this idea of critical consciousness is that one of the first things I wanted to do as Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion is try to change our system of course evaluations. And the reason I wanted to do that is because when I first arrived here, and the informal standards are different depending on the academic unit. But in our unit, we had very high expectations for student evaluation scores. And so really, if you weren't at least somewhere between a 4.3 and a 4.5 on a 5-point scale, you were considered to not be a good instructor. So beyond that, and I think that a lot of people in this room are familiar with this, we know that those scores are also biased. So there's been over 100 studies showing that faculty of color tend to get lower scores on student evaluations. Women who do not conform to traditional gender stereotypes and gender attributes also tend to get lower scores. Teachers teaching certain subjects that students don't necessarily want to learn tend to get lower scores. So we know that this is just not a very, first of all, it's not what I would call a valid measure from a measurement standpoint, because it actually doesn't measure learning or teaching effectiveness. It actually measures the experiences that students are having. But second of all, we know that it's biased. So I started in partnership with our dean at the time, this idea of, okay, how about we change this to be more inclusive, to be more empowering, and to be less sort of quantitative in terms of there being like an absolute cutoff. And so we worked on this together and came up with this idea that our faculty, at the end of every year during our annual reviews, were going to write a paragraph describing how their efforts that year in terms of teaching, feedback they'd gotten from students, ways that they changed their courses, and essentially how they felt they had grown as an instructor. So this was great, wonderful, to me in my mind anyway. And then we started to get some pushback about this idea. And then at the time, in trying to work through this, a small team of us was talking about it, and one of the members of the team had said, well, maybe we should just forget this whole idea. And if you really look at our scores, our faculty of color, some of our faculty of color have the highest scores anyway. And so that's when, at that point, it ended up being helpful to think about this being more of a larger issue, that this is not just about, okay, we may have a couple faculty of color who are beating the odds, who have found a way to get very high scores, but this is about overall the idea that we know that we're using a tool that is biased. And actually, it's something that, although we're focused on some of the discrepancies in terms of scores, but actually having this more empowered approach would help everyone. And so thinking about it that way, the committee did decide to move forward, and we just finished our second year doing our annual reviews in this way and have continued to expand on it. And I will share that the first year, a couple of the people who were happiest that we had this were people from the majority group who felt like, gosh, I had a really rough semester. I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to tell a story, to tell my narrative in writing, and to talk about what I learned. Okay, so that is critical consciousness. So, and that's one way that we kind of use that to try to get unstuck in that moment. So then the next one is handling ambivalence. So the ambivalence that I have noticed, and I'd be curious to hear what your experiences are, is that I have seen that there can be a lot of passion, a lot of buy-in related to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion, just in general, in a vacuum. But when that starts to be associated with some level of discomfort, some level of sacrifice, that's when it's harder to move forward some of our DEI initiatives, and where we'll see like a pause. So then this idea of ambivalence also, and how to handle it, for me comes a little bit from the idea of motivational interviewing, and some of you may have heard of this, but if you haven't, essentially motivational interviewing is this idea that with behavior change, particularly things that involve a mix, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, that we can feel ambivalent, that there can be some internal conflict. It's been used a lot with addictions. It can be used for other behavior change, becoming more physically active. So I put this picture here that comes from the Harvard Business Review that says, "Be a better ally." And what I appreciated about this, so I think, we can look at it as there is a person who is depicted as an ally who's helping a woman of color, it looks like climb this ladder. But one of the things I also was thinking about is for the ally, what, in terms of, what consequences do you think he is experiencing in this picture as he's helping this woman up the ladder? Yes? He's not ascending, thank you. So while he is expending some energy helping her up, and that means he's not climbing up his own ladder. Any other ideas about any consequences? Yeah, he's probably working extra hard. He's trying to stay where he is and also trying to lend a hand to support her as she's climbing up, yes. And so I think actually, as much as we often think about being an ally as a kind of, I loved Dr. Burpole kept talking about a party, but yeah, about being at a party, we're all together, standing next to each other. And I do think there is enjoyment, of course, but I also think sometimes there can be, there is some effort, there can be some discomfort in the progress. And I think to really sustain the progress, that we really need to learn how to handle that and realize it's going to come and to accept that. And so I'll share a brief story that a colleague of mine shared with me, and I often feel more comfortable sharing information if I'm giving someone a compliment. So, so this is a person who is a colleague who shared with me that after some reflection in terms of how she was interacting with me around some of my DEI initiatives, that she realized that she actually wasn't as supportive as she was trying to present herself as. And so what she actually said to me was that, "I realized I was undermining some of your efforts because I didn't want to lose my power and influence." So I'll read that again. "I realized I was undermining some of your efforts because I didn't want to lose my power and influence." So, and of course I said, "Thank you so much for sharing with me that, you had that realization." And I thought it was really poignant, and I just wondered how true that might be for other colleagues who have never said that. And again, that is what really sustaining DEI work can look like. It might look like losing a little bit or feeling like you're losing a little bit of your relative influence to allow someone else to have a little bit more influence. So that overall, hopefully, as a whole, as a collective, we can become more inclusive. Okay. Yes. She said, do I know what made my colleague realize this? Well, I know what contributed to it is that essentially, I think she had observed me kind of call in someone else who had some concerns, I think, about the level of support she felt that I was giving to her idea. And I took the opportunity to say, I think there are many times that you haven't supported my ideas either, and was able to give lots of examples. And then I think the other colleague observed this and reflected on it a lot. But I think part of it was watching it and having some distance, but I think also the identifying, what had happened. And being able to see it. So it's so funny to make choice. It just so happened that some of the more intense obstacles come first, but the next one, ongoing reflection, I think is a little bit more gentle. And it's exactly what you think. And actually it comes into play with that story that I just shared as well, where they did take taking a step back and thinking. And so I don't know how you all like to take a moment to reflect, if it's on the drive, taking a walk, over a cup of coffee, but I do think having some time to just think and process and digest what has happened, what we've learned, how we have been and how we have shown up, is also really helpful and important in terms of sustaining DEI efforts. So here is a quote, and this one is fairly straightforward, from a colleague that said, I was looking back in my journal from 2 years ago and realized I haven't been as focused on racial justice lately as I was then. So I was looking back in my journal from 2 years ago and realized I haven't been as focused on racial justice lately as I was then. And so this is someone who just happens to have a practice of journaling, and so then they were able to think about their energy and effort and focus, and so that was a tool that they were able to use. But I do think just sometimes thinking about at the end of the day, okay, how was I showing up in those meetings today? Was I really actively doing things to promote inclusivity? Okay. So the I is for interacting bravely. And so this really means, are we able to nurture and cultivate the types of interpersonal relationships where we can have genuine exchanges that may not necessarily be comfortable, but hopefully where we can feel brave. And so this can be people who may have very different experiences from us or come from different backgrounds than we do, but it also can be with people who come from similar backgrounds as we do. But do we have these sorts of relationships specifically related to inclusivity where there is space made so that someone could say to me, you know, Emma, I think that was maybe a little short-sighted when you did that. I think maybe you didn't realize it, but you were not being as inclusive as you could have been. So I wanted to share a quote related to this potential solution to an obstacle, which is, "I am your friend and I have had that experience with you too." I am your friend and I have had that experience with you too. So this comes from a situation, a different situation in which there was a sort of a small group conversation being had about the role of, I would say, perfectionism in academia. So I think a lot of us in academia, we know that there's just a lot of pressure to try to really be excellent and have it together all the time. And obviously we want to be competent. We want to do a good job. And we really do want to be excellent. And it can be a difference between being excellent and being perfect, and also between giving feedback to someone where you consistently point out the flaws, even in something that is mostly positive. If you feel like the vast majority of whatever that professional activity was really great, but really feeling like you really want to just focus on the flaws. And so, in talking about this sort of a situation, a small group of us were also talking about, okay, that is difficult anyway, right? For anyone who is a professional and in DEI work, I think a lot of us know that we can get a lot of feedback. I mean, leaders in general get a lot of feedback, but we get a lot of feedback. And sometimes it can be mostly constructive, mostly critiques, which again, I think the instructive part of that can be very helpful. At the same time, I think that, and this is the conversation that was being had when this comment was made, was what does it look like if there's a person who occupies certain marginalized identities, if mostly the public feedback given to that person is negative? Even if that is not necessarily the totality of even how the audience feels, but what does that really look like? So during the course of this conversation was when a person was really feeling, who was being given this feedback, was really feeling like, actually, I don't think I do that. I don't really think so. And then someone that had a very positive relationship was able to step in and say, I'm your friend, and I've had that experience with you too. So I will say that I think it was a really important moment, and I think it's because of the relationships that had already been built. So 2 more. So the next one is confronting oppression. And so really, I wanted to start with, I have this a picture of a person going up the steps because when we're thinking about what does it really look like to take an action, to take a step to confront oppression, it doesn't have to be huge. Sometimes it's a small step. Sometimes it's something that we want to build on. But I also think that being able to collect examples of what that really looks like also can be really important. And so, so the quote for this one is, "I just want to call attention to what she said." I just want to call attention to what she said. And so this quote comes from a situation in which there was a nonprofit meeting, and a member of the board of that nonprofit, who happens to be a woman, had been sharing a concern related to something that the nonprofit had been doing. And then a couple months later, she really felt like her thoughts had been dismissed and her concern had been dismissed. A couple of months later, a man also on the board, male board member, made a very similar comment. And the rest of the board seemed to give a lot of attention and energy to it and was very invested in trying to explore this concern. So then the woman said, "Okay, I just want to say that I said this thing 2 months ago, and I really seems like no one heard what I said." And then there was still silence, and another male on the board said, "I just want to call attention to what she said." And until he said that, it appeared from the outside that we were just going to continue on with the conversation. That she took the brave step of saying, "I said this 2 months ago, and now that he said it, it seems like we're concerned." So there still wasn't, it didn't seem like going to be a change in that pattern or process until another board member, who's also a male, said, "I just wanted to call attention to what she said." And so that is an example of confronting oppression. And so I also think it's a good example of how that can be, it can seem subtle in some ways. I mean, it wasn't subtle in that it actually was shining a light on something, but the words themselves, it's not like there was new information. It was just an invitation to pause. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about emotion management. And I'll ask you all, why do you think emotion management might be a way to overcome any unanticipated obstacles we might run into when trying to carry out DEI initiatives?
It can be distracting. Start to focus more on the emotion than the goal.
Yes, yes.
Managing reactivity.
Managing reactivity. Did I see someone back here? Oh. Okay. Emotions can be distracting, and then also managing reactivity. Yes.
I'd say being objective, because you may have a stake in what you're doing, but you really, it's not about you. You need to think about the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
I like to point out to the word, the acronym that you're using, which is choice. And if you let go of your emotions, you have choice. And you don't have if you're either like or
Yes. Did everyone hear that? So exactly that. And I think, you know, the reason I picked this picture on the right is that it's not that emotions give us no information. So I'm not suggesting that we cut off our emotions. I actually think that emotions can really let us know, okay, something happened and I don't feel right about something. that just happened. So I do think it's important to be in tune with our emotions. It's just about managing them. So can we take that information and not necessarily just automatically act on it, but take that information, but also take a pause, think about it, reflect more. And so this is a quote that actually isn't from a specific story, but it's something that I sometimes share and when I'm doing DEI trainings about the inclusivity part, which is, I'm going to take a deep breath so that I can show up in this space the way I want to. I'm going to take a deep breath so that I can show up in this space the way I want to. And the final example I'll give is really one from something actually that occurred with me really in the past week, where so I tend to, in general in life, be a fairly quiet person, and I'm not super extroverted. Typically at a social gathering, I'm probably gonna be talking to one person very lowly. And at the same time, I think it's just my personality, and also I think because I'm a Virgo, a lot of times I actually do think I'm right. So it may take me a long time to say something, but once I do, it's like, okay, listen, that's right. So recently I was having a discussion with someone, and it was about DEI work and kind of what is the best. I was really arguing that, okay, I think we need to use this word, and they were coming back with, no, I think we need to use this other word, and I found myself getting really annoyed and upset. And so then I just said, okay, I need to just exit this conversation for right now and think about this. And my emotion management strategy at that point was I talked to a couple of friends of mine, say like, why am I getting so upset about this? Like, we are talking about words, and I'm like debating like back and forth about a word. And so I think that that was really helpful for me just to get another perspective. And I think that there was some merit to why I was getting so upset, but I also, feeling so bothered was also stopping me from seeing the other person's point of view, which actually wasn't that different from mine. And so I think that was really helpful. So I'm not going to necessarily go over the tool in great detail. I think that I hopefully have illustrated for you all that the idea is more so that if you're in an organization trying to move forward change and find that the organization seems to not be making much progress or not be making progress as quickly as you thought or others thought, or that there's a lot more resistance than you had anticipated, that it could be that if you take a look at some of these areas, you might find a clue in terms of a way to move forward and a way to get unstuck. So that's it, but I'm happy to take a question or a comment or two. I think we have time, I think. Yes. So if anybody has a comment or a question. I didn't hear everything that you said.
Basically, do you see a relationship between emotion management and stereotype threat?
Is there a relationship between emotion management and stereotype threat? Sure. I mean, I think any sort of, yes. I mean, I think that when we start to act based on our emotions in a way that is not really either in line with our values or in line with our goals, then I think that, yeah, there could be an association. So in that case, I mean, it's more so, I'm worried that, you know, I've heard stereotypes about my sex, about people of my ethnic group, my socioeconomic status, and because of those fears, that is, you know, impacting my performance. So, yes. And I also think that if I am thinking that, so a different sort of situation in terms of this emotion management, where I see it a lot in terms of DEI efforts, has to do with someone who has been called in or called out and feels like their competence was questioned, their identity is questioned, whether they're a good person was questioned, and they're really getting upset and not really able to hear the information, or, and a lot of times, not as able to actually show up the way they really want to because of those emotional reactions. I can't remember if I saw another hand. Thank you all.